are pushing back against AI. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, you might remember last spring when Canadian screenwriters were really close to going on strike. Artificial intelligence was a big part of those negotiations. And even though the screenwriters got a deal, AI is still this question that is kind of looming over the industry. It still poses a big threat. So now, writers are sounding the alarm. I want you to listen to something, okay? You're going to hear Andrew Fung, who starred in Kim's Convenience and, of course, in Run the Burbs. He was also one of the co-creators and one of the writers of that show. And what you're going to hear is Andrew reading a number of famous lines from Canadian film and television. Then you're going to hear something that AI pumped out when he was given the prompt to improve on the original version.
All right, we're going to start with a classic, Degrassi High and the Zit Remedy. Everybody wants something, they'll never give up. Everybody wants something, they'll take your money and never give up. AI wants to improve it too. Everybody craves something they'll never let go of. Everybody wants something that'll take your money and never relent.
Andrew Fung there. Look, that clip is a part of a promotional video by the Writers Guild of Canada called Nice Try AI. To find out what's at stake for Canadian screenwriters right now, Bruce Smith is here. He's the president of the Writers Guild of Canada, along with WGC member Anthony Q. Farrell. Anthony and Bruce, welcome to the show. How's it going, y'all?
Very good.
I'm delighted. I was laughing at the attempt at improving the original script. That's quite something. We're going to get to that in a moment. But Anthony, look, let me start with you. You were on this podcast back around the time when that strike was averted. You got a new contract. Can you give us a sense now? No, yay for a new contract. But also, we're at a different place now. We're at a different place in terms of where Canadian writers are at with AI. Can you give us a sense of where we are now?
Well, I think thanks to the work of Bruce and the other people on the negotiating committee, we got a good deal that's going to at least protect us in terms of transparency, right? Like, I think that's a big thing. We know AI's here, genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to be able to change that. But what we do want is to make sure that we're protecting our jobs, we're protecting our careers, we're protecting our livelihood. And we know producers are going to try and their job is to cut as many corners as possible to try and make as much profit as possible. That's what they do. We understand that. It's not a surprise to anyone that businesses want to make money. What? Why? So they're going to look for opportunities to cut costs. And this is one of those things that they're exploring, which is using AI to write scripts. But now with the deal, what we have is if they do use AI for anything, it can't be considered like an actual, like they're creating a show. They're not a human writer. They're not a member of the guild. They're not, it can be research. It can be something like Bruce, then you mentioned like something about like almost like a, not quite like an article, but you can see it, you can think of it like just them handing
like an old newspaper article from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's great. It could have super valuable information in it, but nobody owns it.
Right.
And it's not it's a piece of reference material. It's great. That's what AI is for us. Because our real fear was like AI is not good enough to really write a script now. What it does, it's an amalgamation machine that's really good at predicting the next. It's a super autofill.
Right.
But what that means is it always goes to the most common, most popular, most familiar, most homogenized answer, always. It's sort of the opposite of creative. And so what we were afraid of was we're going to become the Canadian Rewriters Guild. They're going to have AI churn out a, half-page idea, put their name on it, and have us turn it into a real script. And so what we did was get an agreement where, no, if AI touched it, it's like that 100-year-old newspaper article. It's great. You can hand it to me. I can read it. I can use it. But don't call it something you own. Don't call it an outline. Don't call it a script. Don't call it anything except what it is, which is a piece of AI-generated reference material.
Okay, so you and Q, okay, I should also note, Anthony Q. Farrell, no one calls you by your government name. Everyone just calls you Q. And I don't know I'm using your government name on the show. But Bruce, so you guys just laid out some of the protections that have been won by the writers. But then also you're putting some of this stuff to the test when you put out a video like Nice Try AI. So we heard that off the top, Andrew Fung sort of trying to recreate the version that was given to us by AI. What was your reaction when that's what AI brought back? What was your reaction to that video?
It was in a way exactly sort of what I expected. Like on the surface, it's really funny. Okay, pitter patter, let's get at her becomes quick and slick. Let's get going. But actually, that's really revealing, right? Because
Yeah.
pitter patter, let's get at her, or take off, you hoser. Those are Canadian regional dialects. Like that's a specific voice, and it's
Yeah.
funny. And what AI is always going to replace with is something completely generic from nowhere or from America. And the individuality, the creative voice is just gone to this generic robot soulless voice that's very clever. It knows a lot of words. It can paraphrase whatever you tell it, but it can never be Shakespeare. It can never make up a new word. It
Okay.
can never do something original. It can only draw on what it frankly stole.
Actually, I want people to hear more of Nice Try AI. Let's hear a bit more of it.
Let's take it back to today's special. Remember that one? It had the magical line, hocus pocus, alamagocus. AI is like, poof, magic is in the air. Oh, damn, man, we're just doing Jeff real dirty, aren't we? Last one, Strange Brew, Bob and Doug. The original line is, take off, ya hoser. Classic. AI's version is, get lost, ya goof. I feel like a crime against comedy has been committed here.
Take off your goof. Q, as a professional writer, how do you feel when you hear AI, I guess changing these iconic lines?
It was, to me, it was like, it reminded me of like hearing like a 5 or 6 year old be like, hey daddy, I heard my first joke. And you're just being like, this is adorable. You know what? You're gonna be a good accountant one day. This is no, but it did have a sense of like, exactly what Bruce was saying. It just felt like homogenized. It just felt like it has some synonyms. Like I was like, okay, this is not comedy, right? And we get it. Comedy is subjective. So I'm sure to some people out there, those things were funny. But for people who have been in the business for a long time, who've been doing this for years, and we have built our reputation on knowing what's funny to most people, what's subjectively funny to most people.
Yeah.
I can tell you that AI is in a place, not yet. It's not there yet. Let's just put it that way.
But I mean, like, okay, I think that's actually an important point to talk about because you're right. I can confidently say no one listening to this conversation will say, poof, there's magic in the air is like a funny line. Like there's no comedy to be found there. However, and I think this is important to point out, is like the thing that you just said, like AI sort of at its starting point. This is the dumbest that AI is ever going to be. It's only going to get smarter from here. So as you kind of think about that, and the idea of it getting smarter and then there's another human at the end of it, how do you see, the job changing as AI kind of gets smarter?
Well, for me, I know it will get smarter. This is how computers work, and this is how we as the civilization work. I think the other thing that I want to jump into here is like, if AI gets smarter, these bots, are they Canadian content? Because they're going to be ripping material from all around the world, and like Bruce is like stealing material from all around the world from writers in Canada and America and Portugal and Africa and everywhere. And if it puts something out, like is that considered Canadian content? Can a Canadian production company throw that over to Capcom and be like, this is a Canadian robot? It's like, no, it's not gonna work, right? So it's, I think for accessibility reasons and for writers who are using the AI to help them with certain things, it's a great tool. It's a fantastic tool. And I think we should continue to think of it that way as opposed to thinking about it as something that can replace the people that are actually doing the job.
Go ahead, Bruce. Go ahead.
There's another point, which is maybe it will get smarter. I mean, as it trains on itself, maybe it won't in its current model. But there's also, when I sit my kid down and watch cartoons, I'm not just looking for smarts. I'm looking for some ethics, some morals. So if the computer's going to write a whole new season of some animation show that's been around for 10 years, and it stumbles on an issue about self-harm or suicide or bullying or issues that are important to my kid, does it have any ethics at all? And who's checking on that? And okay, it could be really smart, so smart that I don't notice how poisonous its message is. There's more to the issue than just being good with words. What's underneath it? What's the subtext? What's the soul?
Bruce, as you kind of like step back at this moment, because, I don't think AI was something that people were necessarily worried about in the arts even 2 years ago. This has kind of come off pretty quickly. So, the worry has kind of come on pretty quickly. The questions have started to loom pretty quickly. When you kind of step back and look at the big picture, what are the areas where you feel like AI is sort of most aggressively encroaching on the industry?
Well, everywhere. I mean, it's in my Google is lousy. I can't find anything. I try to look up an old picture and I get nothing. So it may be getting smarter, but it's not getting more helpful to me.
But I just meant it in the industry, like for
In the
writers.
industry,
Yeah.
the cutting edge is animation. The fear of where they're being most aggressive about using it is animation. Long series, and they're pretty open about that. The companies that are publicly traded or animation companies are aggressively going. But it's, there are producers who used to work in development who are now running companies that are trying to just generate product completely with AI without hiring any humans at all. So
That's pretty aggressive.
cutting edge is out there, yeah.
Yeah. Q, you brought up the point about the Canadianness of the shows. And I think that's an important point to talk about because as the screenwriter strike was sort of maybe looming last spring, the Canadian Media Producers Association, which is the organization that you guys were negotiating with, they put out the statement. They said, we believe strongly that the future of future Canadian projects should be written by Canadian writers, not algorithms. You hear that statement. Does that give you assurances? Do you feel kind of comfortable and confident when you hear that?
I feel confident that our negotiation committee did a good job with the negotiations, and we are in a good place where the Writers Guild and CMPA, we agree. We want to move forward together. We want to work together to make great content for Canada. So I think we're in a good place. But there are always outliers. There are always production companies who are trying to find an edge. And even though the CMPA represents a lot of those producers, there are going to be a few who are going to be checking in on AI, trying to figure out ways to move forward with it, right? So, and we know that's happening. Anecdotally, we've heard a couple of things. So it's one of those things where, yes, we feel good about the negotiation, but we're going to be back at the table again in 2.5 years. So, hopefully we'll see where we're at then.
I think that's the thing about labor protection is it's never sort of a project that ends. You're always sort of looking towards the next set of protections you can put in. Bruce, to that end, blue sky it. What if you had a perfect world? What are the protections you'd put in to protect writers, screenwriters from the ways that AI might evolve?
I think it's the core concept which we've had to fight to get agreement on. That writers are human. And that creation is true creativity is a human experience and is a valuable thing that we're undervaluing everywhere. And for both the CMPA and us, we're just trying to deal with, as you said, nobody saw this coming. Nobody knew. Yeah. This isn't a fast one the producers pulled on us. We're all trying to deal with this changing world and what AI is, what it promises it is, which it isn't quite, and what it's going to turn out to be, which I don't think anybody really knows. So that's something we have to work hard so that's not something we're fighting over. That's something we're dealing with together so that we can continue to create and bring Canadian stories to Canadians, hopefully.
Q, I want you to get as dramatic as possible because that is something that I know you to be capable of doing. We got about a minute left to do here. Beyond the scenario, people losing their jobs and losing their incomes, what do you think we lose philosophically, romantically? What do you think we lose when we outsource the work of Canadian screenwriting and Canadian creators to AI?
We are big here in Canada on identity. Everyone, there are so many people who are, who have been here from the beginning of time to people who have settled here. We all consider ourselves Canadian. And that, to be Canadian, is a far-reaching, very wide definition. I think it's important for us to have our voices in these stories. It's important for us to have our voices in these shows that we create. And I feel like if we go to the AI world, we're going to be losing all of that. We're going to be losing our identity. So I think if you're into the idea of Canadians having a say in what we are, let's not hand that over to a bunch of robots who will Americanize us.
That is exactly as dramatic as I hoped as it would be. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate both of you coming on the show today. Thank you for your time, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Bruce Smith is a veteran screenwriter and the current president of the Writers Guild of Canada. He was in Montreal. And Anthony Q. Farrell is a screenwriter and also a WGC Central Region Counselor. He was in Toronto. Thank you so much for your time, you guys. Appreciate it. Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I don't need to tell you that Dune 2 was one of the biggest movies of the year. You probably remember all the hype around it when it came out. The critics loved it, the fact that it was just like a box office smash. But just a few months after Dune Part 2, we have a brand new TV adaptation. It is called Dune Prophecy. It's from HBO, and it acts kind of as a prequel to the Denis Villeneuve movies. Here's a bit of the trailer.
The sisterhood draws women from many worlds to advance our species and govern the future. What do you want?
To wipe out every trace of the sisters from our worlds. That is why I've been gifted a great power.
Consider me a true believer.
Dune Prophecy is coming out weekly right now. Alison Herman has been watching and has some thoughts on it. Alison, welcome to the show, friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Are we going to do the Bene Gesserit voice, or are we not going to do it? Can we just get some agreement on that before we keep going here?
I have not gone through the sufficient training and surpassed human potential, or whatever phrase that Bene Gesserit used in the show. But The show does offer an origin story for the voice, so you can learn all about it.
And I sure would like to. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit here. Set up the series a little bit. Where does it take place in this sort of Dune universe timeline, and who are the people involved in the show?
Sure. So Dune Prophecy takes place 10,000 years before the events of the first film. And you honestly couldn't really tell because a lot of the iconography and the players are the same.
Sure.
But very importantly, this all takes place in the immediate aftermath of a massive war over so-called thinking machines, or what we would call computers. And in the aftermath, thinking machines have been outlawed. And the current thinking is that humans should teach themselves and develop themselves to accomplish many of the same tasks. And that is how we get a sisterhood known as the Bene Gesserit, who, if you have seen the movies, you would recognize they're the witches walking around in black robes and flowing veils, and Rebecca Ferguson plays one. But Dune Prophecy functions as a kind of origin story of the Bene Gesserit, and also situates you more in their point of view than in the movies, where they're these kind of like shadowy, peripheral political players. And so the protagonist of Dune Prophecy, to the extent it has one, is Valia Harkonnen, who is the Reverend Mother, like the head of the Bene Gesserit, and it's very early incarnation, and events kind of play out from there, but that's the basic premise of the show.
Okay, so I've had the kind of fall where I've not been paying attention to the shows that are coming out, and Dune Prophecy is absolutely on my list, but I just didn't know where it was set and the kind of world that it was set in. So I was really surprised to hear that he's been compared a lot to the TV adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale. So I'm fascinated by that particular comparison. I want to come back to that in a moment. But this series sort of starts. We have Emily Watson, you have Mark Strong, along a lot of other much younger faces. Which characters do you sort of find most intriguing in the show, and why?
I think I am most intrigued by Emily Watson's character, Valia, mostly because, if you recall from the films, the Harkonnens are the antagonists. They are set against Paul Atreides and his family. And one of the fun sort of origin story-y, prequel-y things that Dune Prophecy does is explain the origins of that feud, that generational enmity.
It goes back 10,000 years, Alison?
10,000 years.
Okay.
And you see the Harkonnens' home world, and it's sort of fun to introduce a bit of nuance to that, get a different perspective on the events of this massive sweeping story, and adds a little nuance. I think it's a good enticement to people like me, frankly, who are not that into Dune as this huge, extremely dense, lore-filled, decades-long franchise, and love the movies. And the show kind of tugs you in a little bit at a time into the maybe harder to grasp elements of the mythology.
I'm glad you brought that up because I find Dune inaccessible. I find the Dune sort of background to be so inaccessible. And of course, there's the main books, but then there are people who are I've read all 12 of them, or is it 22? I don't even know how many there are. And so I find my brain kind of turning off a little bit. And then when people tell me about a specific section of it, I go, okay, I can maybe grab onto this. I can't do the sort of rather large, expansive thing. So it's kind of cheer to hear that this is a show that's sort of focusing on the Bene Gesserit, because they do exist in the movies that we've seen, like the recent movies, but I don't think you get a lot of attention on them. So when you watch the show, how do you think it deepens your understanding of the Bene Gesserit?
So one of the things I think Denis Villeneuve was very smart about in the movies is that he doesn't overload you with exposition, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of stuff is just sort of intuited and sensed and you see it, but it doesn't really like pause all the action to just dump on you.
That's
like,
why I
here's how
like those
everything
movies,
works.
because otherwise I would have been like, I can't do this. This is too many things for me to know, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. But one of the advantages of TV is that because it's longer, it's more driven by plot, it's more driven by dialogue.
Yeah.
They can accomplish some of that, and it doesn't feel like you're losing all the momentum, and there's already like some interest factor from the movies. So with the Bene Gesserit, for example, the movies do not stop and explain to you that actually the Bene Gesserit seem to have magical powers, but really it's because we outlawed computers and the Bene Gesserit have mastered their own bodies to achieve, they can do the voice and tell people what to do. They can heal their own wounds. And, the movies aren't going to do that, but the show can. And it's a sort of interesting background as to like why and how these women are able to do what they do and how they see themselves, because they would not say that they are like sorcerers or magicians. They see themselves as practitioners of a discipline.
Right.
And I think it's very interesting to do that in a way that feels like it is additive to the overall project and not just like, okay, we're going to sit down and read an encyclopedia at you.
Right. Because of course, if you do that, then that's the quickest way to get me to turn off a thing. Is like I'm just not interested. But like when you sort of look at the show and the fact that it comes after not one but two gigantic Dune movies, I think there's a natural tendency to want to compare them, right? Like Denis Villeneuve just created a world that is so masterful and so kind of pulls you into this world that you kind of naturally, you say, I love the movies, of course I want to be in on the show. The two are not necessarily like to be compared. Denis is not involved at all in the creation of this thing. So what do you think we're getting from the TV show that we maybe don't get from the two movies?
Well, just to start on maybe the more critical note, you're just not going to achieve the same level of visual mastery that someone like Denis Villeneuve is going to bring to that universe.
Like
and I think
scale-wise, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's reasonable to like set that expectation. Like Dune Prophecy, I think looks great and expensive for a TV show, but TV is just not staged on that level, and that's fine. And I think one of the things I respected about the show and admired about it is that it really leans into like what TV is able to do. So like I said, there's more plot, there's more dialogue, there's more characters, there's more story. I think in Dune, in the movies, you're told that there's all this politicking going on in the Imperial Court and there's all these factions being pitted against each other. But the movie focuses on the story of Paul and the very specific beef between the Atreides and the Harkonnens. And one of the things I like about the show is that in addition to the Bene Gesserit, the other sort of center of power is the Emperor's court, the Emperor played by Mark Strong. And you actually get to see some of that, backbiting and factionalism. And it's interesting to see that, and almost in a like Game of Thronesy way, you're like, oh, this isn't just black versus white or A versus B. There's like all these different parties who are having to negotiate this world. And TV, frankly, has more space than film. So it can actually dedicate some times and some storylines to figuring out, situating you within this world that the movies are wisely very focused as an entry point into.
30 seconds to you. I take your point that this is sort of its own entire universe. Does it stand on its own as a TV show, do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. I do think, it's being positioned and will inevitably exist in the context of a franchise. But I think it succeeds by understanding that it is TV and therefore can approach this story in a different way than a blockbuster can.
I like the continuity of us talking about AI and screenwriters at the start and then going on to a show where the thinking machines have been banned. Alison Herman, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Alison Herman is a TV critic at Variety. You can catch Dune Prophecy on Crave. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. If you're around, I'd love to see you then.